think that money could be, part of their down payment on a house or whatever, or at least, later use it to help pay for the divorce attorney, right? Welcome to the show, Min. And can you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
My career has been mostly focused around like data and analytics and research. So you can say I'm very quant focused. So I know a thing or two about numbers. I grew up in sort of lower income. My parents were immigrants, so I didn't grow up with a lot of money. So I've been really adamant about learning as much as I can about money in my life. And in my adult life, most recently, I've really wanted to teach others everything I've learned through the last 15 years of just personal research and just teaching others about money. And on this episode, I think it's gonna be an interesting conversation because I think Judy and I have interesting viewpoints of being frugal with money, saving money, and investing to build wealth, regardless of how much income you make.
Just to start out a little bit, since the title of today's show had to do with, how you can still build wealth or get rich, even if you're a low-paid lawyer or any other employee. With that said, there were also some lessons that I learned from other Asian immigrant families. My parents came from Taiwan, and when my dad showed up in Birmingham, Alabama in 1971, he only had $100 US, and he had a ton of debt. So my parents lived very frugally. So there were definitely a lot of things that my family did to save on money, and other, Asian immigrant families we knew, like they would do kind of weird things. I remember this other family, we went into their kitchen and the aunt was reusing paper towels by carefully hand washing them. And then she would hang them up on some like string that she had in the kitchen, to dry out her paper towels so she could reuse them.
Our families did the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. With that said, Min, would you like to jump in and tell me a little bit about things that you and your family did growing up to save money?
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of Asian immigrant families follow the same threads of being very frugal. Just like your parents, my parents immigrated to the US with nothing. So we grew up in like a 1-bedroom apartment in New York. Looking back, not a lot of money, but I never felt like I was deprived of anything. I think like your parents, they just worked their asses off to make sure we had what we needed. And your stories about not having the nicest clothes reminded me of the same thing, where I would have like one nice like Ralph Lauren polo shirt, but the rest of my wardrobe was like the fake stuff, right? And I don't know about you, but for me, the hard part growing up was, I think there's a lot of social pressure, and you wanted to have nice stuff because you wanted to show off to your friends. You wanted to show off that you had money. But for us, it's like, you just didn't. And I think over the years in high school and college, I tried to overcompensate for that by, buying a nicer car and not a beat up car, buying more branded clothes like Calvin Klein, Gucci, Polo, things like that.
Wow, you actually bought that stuff?
I did. I would say
How did you have the money? How did you have the money? Did you work?
I worked a bit, and I didn't save much because I thought at that point I was making money, and I decided to spend some of that on nicer clothes. And I think a lot of us fell into the trap of spending a lot of money in your 20s to show off to your friends. And it goes back to that book, Millionaire Next Door, because I think that book talks about the same themes about people living above their means and spending a lot on their credit cards just to buy nice cars, nice clothes, bigger houses they can't afford. And that's a trap that if people get too far into, they'll never get out of. Social media has made like the consumption behavior and consumerism like even worse, in my opinion, because imagine, you're a millennial, you sort of like stuff, you want to keep up with the Joneses, and you see on social media like your circle of friends like experiencing like these vacations or having these nice bags, nice cars, nice restaurants, and they sort of show that off, right? That's sort of what social media presents as the surface of what your life is. So you're more prone to trying to copy what they're doing because they seem happy. So there's like this endless feedback loop of seeing your friends do these things. So you spend money on these things and then everyone's in debt. So I think a lot of us have to have the discipline and self-control to make sure you're not excessively spending money and spending money on the things that truly bring you value, and really trying to figure out what is excess in your life, because by removing excess is where that extra money comes from to actually build wealth over time. I think for you and me is we've managed to like keep our savings very tight and learn how to save money very young, but both of us have learned to like build our careers, invest, build wealth, and not worry about the excessive nature of consumerism that we see a lot in this country. So you've done a better job than I have, I think, being frugal over the years, but me and my wife actually are pretty frugal about how we spend money too. But it's funny, like when you talked about earlier in this episode, when you talked about coming out of school and earning $22,000 as a lawyer, right? Yeah. And that's a shock, right? That's a shock. That was a shock for me to see. Yeah. Because like growing up, I was like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor because I want to make $500,000 a year. And hearing you talk about that video, I'm like, wow, that's so far from the truth.
To be honest, reasons why I was able to still get by was because my parents had paid for all of my schooling. So I had no law school debt. But if I had had student loans to pay, there's no way I could have survived. So I remember like I didn't even have a car then. but around the DC area, it is pretty easy to take public transportation. But since I worked further out in the suburb, I took the bus. Like all that time I wasted standing around waiting at the bus stop, trying to like wait for the next bus to come. And then sometimes I would miss the bus. Shoot, now I have to wait another 30 minutes out here for the next bus to come. But at least that saved us money though, because, having a car is very expensive.
Speaking of cars, funny story for me, like my first job out of college, and I had a computer science degree. So you would imagine like that's a high paying degree.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Isn't it?
I was interning for a company in my senior year in college. But when they brought me on full time, they gave me a salary of somewhere between 40 and 50,000. And as a 22-year-old at the time, like this is it. This is the jackpot, right?
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was a lot of money. So I moved back home after college to save some money to not pay rent. But the stupidest thing I did was I started making money. I had $30,000 in my bank account. And like, this is the most money I've ever seen in my life. So I went and bought a sports car. At 22 years old, it was a used car, but it was still like a Nissan 350Z. So it was like a car that I always wanted, like a stick shift, 2-door, super fast, fancy car, just to like live that lifestyle that I thought I wanted and deserved at 22. But I pretty much blew all my savings to buy this car. Probably the biggest financial mistake I've made since then. But that was a huge lesson of like the value of money at a certain time versus what it could cost, an opportunity cost over the long run. The amount of money I put at it at such a young age without having any other backups of how to invest that money, how to better utilize that money, huge mistake. But it's one of those things where like, if I didn't make that mistake, I wouldn't have learned the lessons from it.
Well, were you also putting money aside in a 401k from your first job, or did you not know much about that?
My step into investing came by accident, right? I think a lot of people don't realize this, especially when they start their careers. I knew 401ks were a thing, but I didn't know how important they were. But the beauty of living at home and not having to pay rent, I didn't have that many expenses besides just stuff I spent money on. So from an early age, starting to work, I decided, hey, I'm just going to try to put as much as I can in my 401k because I think it'll do something later in life. I didn't need the money now, so I invested it all into my 401k. And it's a concept of delayed gratification that I didn't even know what that concept was. And now I really have reaped the benefits of that because starting around 25, I started putting a lot into my 401k just because I didn't need the money immediately. And eventually, before I was 30, I was able to start maxing out my 401k year after year after year. And that behavior just became very automatic. And a lot of younger kids don't realize that putting money into your 401k is effectively investing, right? It's your 401k is a bucket of like mutual funds, safe investments. And I didn't realize that was passive investing until I got down this rabbit hole of really learning about personal finance for myself, how to optimize my money. As I earn more money, how to best use it. So this is where I really got passionate about how to really optimize money that was coming in. And it's funny, growing up, I think both of us were in the mode of being frugal because we wanted to save money, right? Like preserve what we have and not lose what we're making. And that mentality still sits with me today, but it shifted probably like my early 30s where I realized, okay, there's only so much you can save, right? Like there's only so much room between how much you're spending now and the floor, which is $0. And my mindset shift is like, oh, I'm making good enough income now where I can aggressively invest more. And the ceiling of how much you can invest and the ceiling of how much that money can work for you is like limitless. And that's where I started really buckling down on learning all the financial concepts about investing in the stock market, other assets, mitigating your taxes, and different things to invest into real estate. And that's where my money started really exponentially growing, is when that mindset shifted, that mode.
On the topic of investing for retirement, yeah, the sad thing is that when I worked for these small law firms, none of them even had 401ks. The first guy that I worked for didn't have any sort of retirement benefits, but since I had been reading all these financial magazines like Kiplinger's and Money, for a while, then I started my own Roth IRA and contributed the max towards my Roth IRA for every year that I was eligible. So that's why it is better to learn how to handle your own finances and then just put your money yourself into these discount brokerage firms.
For me, being a financial channel, like I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I didn't really understand what an IRA was until like I was 30 because I was investing onto my 401k. I didn't need an IRA. But for those of you watching who are like entrepreneurs or creators or don't have solid 401k programs, the IRA is such a beautiful mechanism to put your money away. And IRAs, for those who don't know, are individual retirement accounts that you can set up Charles Schwab or Fidelity or any of these other big brokerages. And the maximum you put away every year is $6,000. And you can do that through the traditional route, which is pre-tax deferred, or the Roth, which is my preference, which is after-tax contributions. But those after-tax contributions in your Roth can grow completely tax-free until you're like 59 or 60. So the Roth IRA is a super powerful mechanism for basic passive investing. So if you're not already at least contributing a little bit and you're already 25, you should at least look into that.
But another thing is that obviously, as Min and I have said, you always want to spend less than what you make. No matter what you're making, you should be spending less than what you earn. Because with a lot of the divorce clients I've seen, they just feel like, well, I'm making all this money, I'm working hard, therefore I deserve this vacation. I should have this fancy, expensive car. I should live in the right neighborhood in this gigantic mansion. Oftentimes people do just keep thinking more and more like they want to show off, respected amongst their peers, or look like they're rich and everything. So they just keep spending and spending despite making more and more. So they still can't build any wealth, even though technically you would think that they're making great money. So where did it all go?
I remember something, maybe you can talk about this too. When I was younger, I overvalued materialistic consumerism a bit more than now, because you thought by buying a thing, that thing brings you happiness, right? Whether it is like a new car, new clothes, like new gaming, things like that. And all those moments of happiness were very temporary, right? And there's a mantra I heard when I was younger that I didn't believe until now, but you should definitely prioritize spending money on magical experiences that you'll remember versus spending money on stuff that will just disappear and be thrown away over time. Even for me, that feeling was very, very strong in my 20s. I wanted that like BMW M4, and I would have like paid $1,000 a month for that car payment. And luckily I never did. And for those watching, like that feeling never really goes away. It's just how you manage that feeling is what changes. So for me, I'm lucky enough where the income level that I have now can afford me the car I really want to drive. But if you're struggling with finances and trying to save and invest, your car payment is one of the biggest expenses you have that you can cut back on.
Yeah, definitely. Just like for buying a house, just because they say that you qualify for this big of a loan or a mortgage doesn't mean that you need to max it out, because it's just going to lead to years of misery when you're struggling to make your car payment or your house payment. Well, considering that's your wife asking the question, I guess it's just my question. So, well, sometimes I do try to talk to friends and family about it, but in general, it is sort of like a taboo subject where it's supposed to be rude to talk about, money with people. I remember my dad once mentioning like, hey, how come on your mom's side of the family, when you guys get together or have family reunions, like just always goofing around and stuff, but not talking about finances? They should be talking about investing. I'm like, really? Okay. Well, I do remember one uncle sort of mentioning how, everybody should own their own home. And he kind of mentioned he had bought some like rental properties in Canada because that's where he lives, to rent it out for tenants. So I think he and his wife did supplement their income, but nobody really talked to us about the nitty gritty of, what are you supposed to do with your money? Like even my parents didn't really talk to my siblings and me about it. And in fact, I was the one that told them about Charles Schwab after my college friend told me about Charles Schwab and, moving our money over there. I mean, I think it's good in general to talk about finances, but, it is true. It doesn't really happen with my friends and family that much, I try to.
I think the same thing over here, where I think talking about money is just generally taboo, because I think people come thinking that when you talk about money, you're trying to show off that you're making X amount of dollars, you have these things, you have a nice house, and you think it's like a comparison to others. But when I try to talk about money, it's more about the approach and the intent of trying to give value and education to others in my family and my friends, and never trying to come off as conceited or trying to tell them what to do, because I think no one will ever listen, because I think money is like politics and religion, is very personal for a lot of people. So that's my approach of like just trying to like find the right way to talk about these topics, because it's hard, but it's also very, very important. And for the parents thing is also funny, because it's a money script that they planted in your head, where my parents, I'm not sure about yours, like get good grades, work very hard, save your money. And I was like, cool, that's it? That's 3 easy steps? It's like, no, there's like 20 more steps after save money, but they just never were exposed to this. And for the modern generation, there really is no excuse to not learn this stuff, because the information is free, it's abundant, a lot of people are talking about it. So if you're curious or you have questions about how to save money, how to invest, it's all out there. You just need to search for it.
Okay, agree. Money is very personal. It's about emotion more than anything. Yeah. And then you do kind of worry that, people might judge you, if they find out what your money situation is like. And last thing I want is, not just being judged, but also people trying to hit me up for money. So,
yeah, my fear as well.
Yeah. It's like, you don't need to know, because you seem like the type that will beg for money and loans from me. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is probably counterintuitive to the topic at hand. How do you feel about the meme stock? Okay, Min, you have to answer this, because I don't even know much about this.
This is a bit off topic, but I think this is part of the financial lesson here. So GameStop and other meme stocks that have like skyrocketed in the last month or so, and the story's still going, is not really an investment. It's a huge speculation and a gamble. But if you're a gambler and if you want to spend a little bit of money on this, you're totally open to. And in my case, I put about maybe like 1% of my net worth or my portfolio into this just for funsies. And even as friends and people close to me, like, Min, you know you're investing. You're smart at this. You're a mature investor. Why are you doing this? And my response to them was like, hey, do you like going to Vegas? And most times like, yeah. Do you go to the casino? And most of the times like, yeah. Would you play $5 at the blackjack table? And it's like, yeah. My analogy here is imagine going to the casino, but having higher odds than the house. Would you play a bet? And in my case, I'm like, yes. So these are speculative, once in a lifetime type of gambles that I wouldn't recommend for a long-term investment, because 99% of my strategy is slow and steady, get rich slowly, index investing, high growth companies. But that 1% is for fun, because finance, for the most part, once you get to a state where you're automating everything, finance is pretty boring. So anytime I can inject a little bit of excitement into the mix, I'll do it. The second question there is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, super complicated topic, way more than worth like a 1-minute answer. But Bitcoin also is currently a speculative investment as well, but it potentially has the ability to position itself as the future currency for digital transactions. So personally, I'm on the side of being bullish for Bitcoin. A lot of things to prove in the practical world, but the underlying technology is there. The intrinsic value from the community is there. So it's going to continue to grow. Whether or not it's worth the $60,000 price tag per Bitcoin it is today, the jury's out. But I think it's going to be much higher in the future.
So Ken, I always like to, Poor Dad, Rich Dad, get rich slow, just invest and save. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good takeaway, but I wasn't really that impressed with his book. I remember reading it when it first came out and it was like all the rage. But I remember thinking like, this guy is so vague. Like he just talks about, oh, you should buy real estate. And I got rich because I got into real estate. But then I'm like, well, what are the actual steps that you took to get into real estate? Anyway, I don't think I actually bought his book. I was so cheap that I just like read it at Barnes and Noble and didn't pay for it.
The whole get rich slowly thing is a concept that I have on my channel as well, where it's funny when you talk to like a 25-year-old and you give them the option like, oh, do you want to get rich quick or do you want to get wealthy for sure, right? And like that's a very interesting existential question, because everyone wants to get rich quick, but very few people ever can. But if I said, oh, I can guarantee you $1 million in 30 years, that's just boring, right? But that's guaranteed. Like you can have tactical approaches at money that will almost guarantee you, even if you're low income, $1 million by the time you're 60. If you have discipline, are able to save a little bit every month and do it over time, you will get there. But a lot of people just don't have that patience and delayed gratification. So looking for get rich quick schemes, like meme stocks, like Brian was saying just the question before. But those opportunities are few and far between. And realistically, you need decades to build your wealth.
Okay, weddings, lots of money. Are they worth it? To me, no. But Min, like you tell me, you got married more recently.
Financially, on paper, logically, in all ways you do the Excel math things, it is financially not worth it. But going back to my experience and spending money and experience that you really want to remember forever, 100% worth it, right? So it's really up to the person or the couple in this case on how they want to spend that money.
Okay, yeah. I mean, everybody has their different priorities.
But also don't spend like your entire life savings on your wedding either. I think work within your budget, stick to your budget, because weddings could be like 6 figures, right? Depending on where you live and how much.
I mean, to me, weddings normally are kind of more like a waste of money, but who am I to tell people how they want to spend their money? It depends how much money you have saved up. If you have lots of money saved up, then maybe it's no big deal to spend, $50,000 on a wedding.
Yeah. You're a divorce lawyer, so you're biased. You've seen all this money get thrown away dozens of times.
Yeah, I just think that money could be, part of their down payment on a house or whatever, or at least, later use it to help pay for the divorce attorney, right? Let's see. So what are some other tips on how people can build wealth, Min, even if they don't make a lot of money?
I think there's 2 things here, at least, right? One is a theme that we talked about a lot during the show, which is really be aware of how much you're spending versus how much you're making. If you are making $1,000 a week and spending $1,000 a week, you'll never be rich. Actually, you'll actually be very poor because you're living technically paycheck to paycheck. The more you can figure out how to widen that gap between how much you're spending and how much you're making, that's really the key to wealth over the long term. And the unlock to it is like taking that amount of excess and not immediately thinking like, cool, I have an extra $400 this month, or in the case of like stimulus money that's coming in for a lot of people, what do I buy with it? Can I buy a new thing? Can I buy a new TV? Can I, whatever it is. The real question is, how do I take a little bit of this and learn how to invest that money? Because until you learn how to invest, you will never be wealthy, because investing is really the key to unlocking what that wealth path is. So my advice is learn how to invest as soon as possible if you're not already. If you're already doing it through your 401k, IRAs, like good for you. If you want to build more wealth faster, there's tons more avenues to learn there. But really taking that first step is the most important key.
What about real estate? Because sometimes people talk about, investing in real estate and stuff, but after seeing how much trouble it caused my parents with all the property taxes and the deadbeat tenants and stuff, like I was never interested in investing directly in real estate. What about you?
Investing directly in real estate, and by directly, I mean owning a property, and whether that is your own property, rental property, Airbnbs, is not only like a huge investment, but like Judy said, like sometimes a very big amount of work. Like you got to be a landlord. And if you don't want to be a landlord, having real estate investment may or may not be for you. Alternatively, the real estate market is a good vehicle for investments and growing money in general. You can actually invest into real estate without buying real estate. I think a lot of people don't realize that. We won't go too deep here, but there is a thing called real estate investment something. REITs is the acronym. And you can think about them as like mutual funds or index funds, but tied to physical real estate. So the way it works is that these huge corporations will build these REITs, and they buy a bunch of property, and they're building properties, new construction, investing into that space. And instead of you having to put a down payment for a house and buying a house, you put $1,000 towards it, $2,000 towards it. You're buying a share of that REIT, and now you're exposing your portfolio to the real estate market without ever having to buy a house for yourself. Another thing I think is very important is if the viewers are wondering like how to start, and really the basic first step that I mentioned to everybody is that in the last 6 months, if you haven't taken a serious look at your own budget and your expenses, you have to do that, right? You have to really bake that discipline into your own head, and whether or not you do it physically on paper or Excel or whatever it is. I'm a numbers guy, so I like to track a lot of things. I would do this at least every 6 months to make sure my spending is in check, right? So when you're listing down everything you're buying, I separate things into like needs and wants. And things that are needs are like, gotta pay your mortgage, gotta pay your bills, gotta pay your phone bill. But your wants are things that could be excess. Whether that want is that PlayStation 5, or whether that want is a nice sushi restaurant, or whether that want is new clothes, you have to be really honest with yourself over time of how much you're spending on things you actually don't need.
So any parting words of wisdom that you would like to tell our viewers out there?
I think everyone can build wealth over time. I think it's a long road. You can't expect to get rich in a year, 2 years, 5 years even. But if you plan it out and you're young enough, and by young, I don't mean like even 25. Even if you're under 40, you can get there over time. It's a matter of having the right mindset, the right discipline, making sure you're living below your means, delaying your gratification to later in life, not depriving yourself, mind you, but really being honest and intentional about how you spend your money today, because whatever you don't spend today can grow into a lot more in the future.
Oh, and one last thing that I did want to mention. So you should get this like old age generated photo of yourself so that you will think more about your future as an old person. Right? So you're more likely to save money because you constantly think like, okay, well, what kind of life do I want to live when I'm 60 or 65 years old? Like not having any discretionary income, or do I want to, save money today so that I can actually have a really, luxurious, wonderful actual retirement and not have to depend on Social Security benefits when I'm older.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I've never heard that before, but that's hilarious, right? Because it's the same concept I teach a lot, which is paying yourself first. And by paying yourself first, you're paying your future self. A lot of people use their money just to buy stuff because they're like, oh, I want to treat myself to XYZ. But you should really switch that mindset to at least paying some of that amount of money to your future version of yourself, because that future version of yourself is going to live off the money that you make today.
Yeah, exactly. And nothing is sadder than seeing people who are, like over 50 years old and they tell me they're never going to be able to retire, or, just having a lot of financial struggles because they did not start saving at an early age, just squandered away all their earnings and everything. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being the special guest today, Min. This was a great, very informative show. It's nice to hear from somebody else who is also frugally minded. So let's all live cheap and have a great retirement, great early retirement ahead of us.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on, Judy. This was way more fun than I expected. So thank you.
Oh, okay. That's great. So you had low expectations.
Or medium expectations.
Okay, great. Well, have a good evening, and thanks so much for your time. Thanks everybody for joining in. Take care.